Von Lemke received the visitor warmly and was serious and tactful. They talked about literature, but well within conventional bounds. A servant in a white tie served them weak tea with small dry cookies. Out of sheer spite, the visitor asked for some soda water. He obtained it, but with some delay, for Von Lemke had to recall the servant and repeat the order before he finally brought it, a circumstance that seemed to embarrass him. However, he then suggested himself that his guest might like to have something to eat and seemed quite relieved when the visitor declined and finally left. Actually, Von Lemke was just setting out on his career and was still sponging on a highly placed member of his Germanic tribe. At that time, he was sighing after his protector's 5th daughter, and the feeling seemed to be reciprocated. When, however, it came time to marry her off, Amalia was given away to some old German manufacturer, a friend of the bride's old father. Lemke didn't waste too much time shedding tears, but made himself a cardboard theater instead. The curtain went up, the actors gesticulated, the public sat in the boxes, the fiddlers in the orchestra moved their bows across their fiddles. The conductor waved his baton, and in the front rows, elegant gentlemen and guards officers clapped their hands. Everything was made of cardboard and entirely conceived and executed by Lemke himself, who spent over 6 months on the project. Lemke's patron organized a special intimate reception to show the toy theater. It was attended by all his 5 daughters, including the newlywed Amalia with her German manufacturer, as well as many other Fraus and Fräuleins with their German escorts. They all examined and admired the model theater, then they danced. Lemke was very pleased and soon recovered completely from his unhappy love. As the years went by, his career advanced. He continued to work for the government and always managed to land himself good jobs under chiefs who were uniformly his compatriots, so that finally he attained a rather high rank for his age. Sometime before this, he had decided to marry, so he looked around for someone suitable. Once, without his superior's knowledge, he sent a novel to a publisher who, however, declined to publish it. To make up for that, he built an entire railroad station out of cardboard, and it turned out to be quite a success. Passengers carrying their luggage left the building accompanied by their children and their dogs and boarded the train. Conductors and other attendants walked among them. A bell rang, a flag was waved, and the train started. That clever toy took him about a year to complete. But when he was through with it, he was still unmarried. He had a wide circle of acquaintances, mostly among his own tribe, but he also, of course, moved among people of native stock, chiefly in the course of his duties. When he was almost 39, he finally came into some money. His uncle, the baker, died and left him 13,000 rubles. All he needed now was a good, safe post. Despite his relatively exalted position in the service, Lemke was deep down a very modest man who would have been perfectly contented with some unimportant job that would have afforded him sufficient independence, such as superintendent of lumber purchases for the government or something cozy and comfortable like that. He would have been happy to hold such a post till the end of his life, but then, instead of some Gretchen or Ernestine, Julie appeared on the scene. Von Lemke immediately rose a full rung in his career, and the modest, hard-working official suddenly discovered that he, too, might have a spark of ambition. By pre-emancipation standards, Julie owned an estate with 200 serfs, and what's more, she had very important connections. Von Lemke himself was a handsome man while she was already in her 40s. It is interesting to note that he actually fell in love with her. It happened gradually after the realization had come over him that they were engaged. On the morning of their wedding day, he even sent her some verses. She enjoyed it all very much, including the piece of poetry. To be past 40 is no joke. Soon afterward, he was promoted, decorated, and then appointed governor of our province. Before they came our way, Mrs. von Lemke carefully prepared her husband. She thought he had a few assets working for him. He knew how to enter a room, how to look dignified, and how to listen with an understanding expression without saying anything. He had learned how to assume several impressive attitudes, was capable of making a public address, had indeed a few odds and ends of ideas, and had even mastered some of the indispensable catchwords of liberalism. But even so, she was afraid he had become too placid, and that after his long and arduous pursuit of a career, his only real longing was for peace and rest. While she tried to pour some of her own brimming ambition into him, he suddenly started building a cardboard Lutheran church with a pastor coming out to preach his sermon to a congregation listening with piously clasped hands, except for one lady wiping away her tears with a handkerchief and an old man blowing his nose. A tiny organ, specially ordered in Switzerland, notwithstanding the expense, played an appropriate tune. Mrs. von Lemke showed alarm when she found out about her husband's creation, and she immediately locked it up in a trunk she kept in her room. To make up for this, she allowed him to write a novel, but insisted that it should be kept absolutely secret. And after that, she depended only upon herself to achieve her ambitions. But the trouble with that was that she was really a frivolous lady with an inadequate sense of proportion. She'd been an old maid much too long. More and more new ideas cropped up in her ambitious and somewhat overstimulated mind. She had grandiose plans, was determined to run the province herself, longed to have an immediate following, and so had to choose a political trend to follow. At first, Lemke was a little overawed by his new post, but he soon realized, with his civil servant's instinct, that there was actually nothing for him to fear in the governorship. And indeed, the first 2 or 3 months passed very satisfactorily. Then Peter Verkovensky appeared on the scene, and strange things began to happen. From the beginning, the younger Verkovensky assumed a very offhand manner with the governor, but Julie von Lemke, who was usually so sensitive when it came to her husband's position and prestige, either refused to notice this or at least considered it unimportant. Peter became a favorite of hers, and he ate, drank, and almost lived in her house. The governor fought back. He addressed him as, quote, young man, end of quote, in front of people, and patted him condescendingly on the back, but that didn't seem to make the slightest impression on the fellow. Peter seemed to be laughing in his face, even when he was apparently serious, and he said the strangest things to him in front of other people. Once, on returning home, the governor found the young man asleep on the couch in his study, although he had not been invited. Peter explained that he had dropped in on him and, not finding him at home, had, quote, at least had a good sleep, end of quote. Lemke was offended and complained to the First Lady, who laughed aloud and remarked pointedly that it was his own fault if he couldn't command the respect of, quote, that boy, end of quote. Peter never indulged in undue familiarities with her, and besides, she found the young man, quote, naive and refreshing, although, of course, he doesn't belong in society, end of quote. The governor continued to pout for a while. She made them make peace. Peter Verkovensky didn't really apologize. He made some crude joke that at another time might have been taken for a fresh insult, but was now accepted as a sign of regret. Lemke's weak position where Peter was concerned was due to a blunder he had committed when they first met. He had told him about his novel. Thinking that he was dealing with an ardent, romantically inclined young man and being starved for an audience, Lemke had, early in their acquaintance, read 2 chapters of his literary creation aloud to him. Peter listened without concealing his boredom. He yawned rudely and didn't utter a word of praise. Then, before he left, he asked Lemke to lend him the manuscript so he could read it quietly and at leisure and form an opinion of it. The governor consented. Since then, Peter had failed to return the manuscript, although he came to the house daily, and when he was asked about it, he just laughed. Finally, he announced that he had lost it in the street the same day he had borrowed it. When Mrs. von Lemke found out about all this, she was extremely angry with her husband. I hope at least you haven't told him about that cardboard toy temple of yours, she cried, almost in a panic. That made von Lemke think. And thinking was bad for him, definitely not recommended by his doctors. In addition to the trouble that had turned up in the province, of which more later, there was a special matter that was breaking his heart. It had nothing to do with his pride and his position as a government servant of executive rank. When he married, Mr. von Lemke had never even considered the possibility of family quarrels and disagreements. Such things had never entered his dreams about his Gretchens and Ernestines. He didn't feel he could stand family scenes, but Julie had been very direct with him. You can't be angry with him if only because you are much more reasonable than he is and stand incomparably higher on the social ladder. There are many remnants of his former free-thinking ways in this boy, and I think this is just a schoolboy prank. However, he can't be changed just like that. He needs patient handling. We must understand the importance of our young people. Through patience and kindness, I am successfully preventing them from plunging over the brink. But he comes up with such damned nonsense, von Lemke protested. How can I tolerate it when in my presence he declares that the government is deliberately filling people with vodka to stupefy them and thus prevent them from revolting? Just imagine how it looks to other people when I have to listen to that sort of thing. Lemke was thinking of a recent talk he had had with Peter. In a naive attempt to dampen the fellow's liberalism, the governor had shown him his private collection of all kinds of Russian proclamations printed abroad. He had been collecting them since 1859, not simply out of a collecting mania, but rather out of an edifying curiosity. Guessing his intention, Peter said rudely that one line in any of those proclamations had more sense in it than there was in all the government files. Quote, and that doesn't exclude those of your office either, end of quote. Lemke winced. But it's a bit early, he said, almost apologetically. A bit early for us. No, it's not too early. The fact that you're afraid shows that it isn't too early. But look, here's an appeal to destroy the churches. And why not? You, for instance, are an intelligent man and you don't believe, but you know very well that you need religion to keep people asleep. The truth is better than lies, you know. I agree. I'm in full agreement with you, but still it's much too early for this country, the governor repeated, screwing up his face. But what kind of government servant are you agreeing that churches should be razed to the ground and saying that you are willing to march on Petersburg, making it only a question of timing? Lemke resented being caught out so stupidly. That wasn't what I meant. That wasn't what I said, he said, getting further and further involved in the argument and becoming irritated by the slight to his self-respect. You're still young and ignorant of our methods. You're quite wrong. You see, you call us government servants. That's right. Independent officials. That's right, too. But hold on a minute. How do you expect us to act? We act on our own responsibility, and as a result, we serve society as much as you do. The difference is that we are trying to hold together what you're trying to undermine. Without us, the whole thing would fall apart. We aren't your enemies, by no means. We say to you, go ahead, fight for progress. Even go on undermining all the old ways that must be changed, but we shall hold you within the necessary bounds and save you from yourselves, because without us, you would simply undermine Russia and make it look like heaven knows what. And our duty is to preserve a presentable appearance for our country to the outside world. You must understand that we and you are mutually indispensable, just as the Whigs and Tories are mutually indispensable in England. Well then, so we are the Tories and you're the Whigs. That's the way I see it. I'm going to switch now from that was the Andrew R. McAndrew translation, and now I'm going to read that last paragraph about the Tories and the Whigs from the Paveer Velikonski translation. So Andrew R. McAndrew was translated in 1961, that translation, and Paveer Velikonski is 94. Here we go. It's not that. He was getting carried away, his amour propre more and more chafed. Being a young man and above all unfamiliar with our goals, you're mistaken. You see, my dearest Peter Stepanovich, you call us officials of the government? Right. Independent officials? Right. But may I ask, how do we act? The responsibility is on us, and as a result, we serve the common cause the same as you do. We merely hold together that which you are shaking apart, and which, without us, would go sprawling in all directions. We're not your enemies. By no means. We say to you, go forward, progress, even shake all that's old, that is, and has to be remade. But when need be, we will keep you within necessary limits and save you from yourselves, for without us, you will only set Russia tottering, depriving her of a decent appearance, while our task consists precisely in maintaining her decent appearance. Realize that you and we are mutually necessary to each other. In England, the Whigs and Tories are also mutually necessary to each other. So then, we are the Tories and you're the Whigs. That's precisely how I see it. Andrei Antonovich even waxed enthusiastic. Ever since Petersburg, he had enjoyed talking intelligently and liberally, and here, furthermore, no one was eavesdropping. Peter Stepanovich was silent and bore himself somehow with unusual gravity. This egged the orator on even more. Do you know that I, the master of the province, he went on, pacing the study, do you know that I, owing to the multitude of my duties, am unable to fulfill even one of them? And on the other hand, it would be just as correct to say that there is nothing for me to do here. The whole secret is that here everything depends on the views of the government. Suppose the government even establishes a republic, say, out of politics or to restrain passions, and on the other hand, parallel with that, suppose it strengthens the power of the governors. Then we governors will swallow up the republic. Not just the republic, we'll swallow up whatever you like. I at least feel I am ready. In short, if the government sends me a telegram declaring activité dévorante, then I'll give them activité dévorante. I said here, right in their faces, my dear sirs, for the balancing and flourishing of all provincial institutions, one thing is necessary: an increase of the governor's power. You see, all these institutions, whether local or legislative, ought to, so to speak, to live a double life. That is, they ought to exist. I agree that this is necessary. Well, and on the other hand, they ought at the same time not to exist. All depending on the government's view. If the notion should arise that these institutions suddenly seem necessary, I immediately have them available. If the necessity passes, no one will find them anywhere in my province. That is how I understand activité dévorante. And it cannot exist without an increase of the governor's power. We're talking privately. You know, I've already applied to Petersburg about the necessity for a special sentry at the door of the governor's house. I'm awaiting an answer. You need two, said Peter Stepanovich. Why two? Von Lemke. stopped in front of him. I don't think one will be enough to earn you respect. You surely need two. Andrei Antonovich made a wry face. You allow yourself God knows what, Peter Stepanovich. You take advantage of my kindness to make caustic remarks and play some sort of benevolent curmudgeon. Well, that's as you like, Peter Stepanovich muttered, but all the same, you're paving the way for us and preparing our success. That is which us and what success? Von Limp stared at him in surprise but received no answer. Yulia Mikhailovna, after hearing a report of the conversation, was very displeased. But really, Von Limp defended himself, I cannot behave as a superior towards your favorite, especially when we're in private. I might have let something slip from the goodness of my heart. From all too much goodness. I didn't know you had a collection of tracts. Kindly show it to me. But he asked to take it for a day. And once again, you gave it? Yulia Mikhailovna became angry. What tactlessness! I'll send someone now to take it back from him. He won't give it back. I'll insist! Von Limp boiled over and even jumped up from his place. Who is he to be so feared? And who am I not to dare to do anything? Sit down and calm yourself, Yulia Mikhailovna interrupted. I will answer your first question. He came to me with excellent recommendations. He has abilities and occasionally says extremely intelligent things. Karmazinov assured me that he has connections almost everywhere and is extremely influential with the youth of the capital. And if through him I can attract them and gather them all around me, I can divert them from ruin by showing a new path for their ambition. He is devoted to me with his whole heart and heeds me in everything. But while we're indulging them, they can do devil knows what. Of course, it's an idea. Von Limp vaguely defended himself. But now I hear that some tracts have appeared in the district. But we heard that rumor already in the summer. Tracts, false banknotes, and whatnot. Yet nothing has been brought in. Who told you? I heard it from von Blum. Ah, spare me your Blum, and do not dare to mention him again. Yulia Mikhailovna boiled over and for about a minute was even unable to speak. Von Blum was an official from the governor's office, whom she especially hated. Of that later. Please don't worry about Verkovensky, she concluded the conversation. If he had participated in any mischief, he wouldn't talk the way he does with you and with everyone here. Phrasemongers are not dangerous, and I would even say that if something were to happen, I would be the first to learn of it through him. He is fanatically devoted to me. I will note, anticipating events, that had it not been for Yulia Mikhailovna's self-importance and ambition, perhaps none of the things these bad little people managed to do here would have taken place. Much of it is her responsibility.